Hello and welcome to Healing Begins Here, brought to you by the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. I'm Olivia Oropeza, VSC's Prevention Education Manager, and I'm so glad you're joining us. Before we begin, please be advised that today's episode includes conversations about online abuse, sextortion, harassment, and technology-facilitated violence. These topics may be difficult for some viewers. If you need support at any time, please know the Victim Service Center is here for you. We provide free, confidential services to anyone impacted by violence, regardless of age, gender, or background. You can reach us anytime through our 24/7 helpline, 407-500-HEAL, or 407-500-4325. Today's episode is titled Behind the Screen, Technology and Abuse. Technology connects us in powerful ways, but it also enables new forms of harm. Sextortion, non-consensual intimate image creation, deepfakes, and digital coercion are all forms of technology-facilitated abuse that can have devastating impacts on survivors. To start, we're joined by victim advocate Nicola Pritchard, who works directly with survivors experiencing these harms and provides frontline insight into how abuse occurs and how we can best support these survivors. Nicola, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what technology-facilitated abuse looks like in relationship and how common is it?
Sure. So it's becoming more and more common as technology becomes more accessible. It's, like you said before, it's making us more connected, it's making things more accessible so people can reach our services more easily. And so technology is very exciting in that way, but it also has the flip side of becoming more accessible to everybody, and that includes perpetrators of violence. So there's kind of this dual reaction, especially as advocates, when a new form of technology comes out, and it's very exciting, but it's also very scary,
right,
because of the new ways that people will be able to victimize someone. It's fairly common. I think it is definitely underreported. We see it a lot in domestic violence relationships, especially with younger people, especially in teens, which is very concerning. And it's one of those things that is very hard to safety plan for, because the technology is changing so fast.
Right.
And so as soon as you kind of get a handle on one thing, there's a new form of technology coming out. And so that's very scary.
Yeah, definitely. So you had mentioned that this happens sometimes in relationships that teens could be in or domestic violence situations. How do we typically see that technology being used to facilitate that abuse or to maintain control over that individual?
Sure. So the most common and long-term thing that we've seen is the non-consensual sharing, or the threat of the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. So those images may have been shared with the person consensually, but then later down the line, as a form of control, there's a threat of, well, I'll send this to your family, I'll post this online. And originally, if you look back, more analog, if we could say at times, it would be, well, I'm going to print this out and I'm going to send it to your boss.
Right.
Then as social media kind of started to become bigger and connects people, well, I'm going to put this on Facebook for all of your friends and family to see. These days, it's kind of morphing into, even if you don't send those pictures, they can make the pictures.
Right.
And so that's where AI and that really big boom that we've had with AI recently becomes very scary, because you don't even have to share intimate pictures.
Right.
You can find a picture of someone on Facebook of you just smiling and make sexual images of them.
Right.
And so then that can be shared out to your workplace, your friends, your family. And so that is used as a control technique to keep you in the relationship, to get you to do certain things that maybe you don't want to do. And unfortunately, even if it's not you, they can take pictures of your kids, they could take pictures of your loved ones and threaten to share those out as a way of manipulating you and controlling you.
Right. So you mentioned AI, being utilized in this space. How are we seeing that being used? You mentioned, maybe they could even just take photos you haven't given them offline and create something. Is that what the deepfake is? And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So it's not necessarily a new phenomenon, it's just become a lot more realistic. So if you look back at Photoshop in its early days, there are examples of people photoshopping someone's face onto something, but it doesn't look perfect and it took a ton of time. But with certain AI platforms and image generation, and especially with AI kind of generating its own ideas. It's scarier because it's super quick. You can get that image in maybe a couple seconds, maybe 30 seconds, and you can get a bunch of them. And without guardrails around what that AI can produce, you can produce so much. Right. Deepfakes became a thing. I think a term actually came from a Reddit forum. And you could put someone's face onto a video. But again, back in the day, it was not that realistic. People saw it and it was a deepfake.
Right.
Now, you know, for entertainment purposes, people can put your face onto something, and now you're doing a TikTok dance or you're doing something entertaining, but you can also put that onto pornographic images. Or even, you know, you can generate someone's voice saying something. And it's very realistic and it's very accessible. And those videos that used to, it would take you maybe a month to get something looking realistic, you can get that in a couple of minutes.
Right.
And so AI is a very scary new horizon for trying to protect survivors and keep people safe on the internet.
How have you seen that issue affect clients and survivors psychologically or socially? How is this affecting them?
It's very interesting. It's very similar in terms of the reaction that survivors have to any kind of other victimization. So you see the self-blame, shame, levels of embarrassment that sometimes are slightly different, I would say, because it feels like you were a part of your own victimization, which can lead to that self-blame, especially if you did send pictures that can feel like you did something wrong or that you made a mistake, and you know, it harms your trust with other people as well. We see very similar levels of PTSD in people who experience image-based sexual abuse than we do with any other kind of sexual abuse. So it really does affect people in a very similar way, but something that I do think is interesting is the public's reaction to those symptoms is very different. So people see it as not as valid because it's not a physical thing that's happening to you, something tangible. And so that can kind of compound the stress because, you know, very similar to victim blaming in any sense. It's invalidating those feelings a little bit.
Right. It sounds like it's very impactful. It's growing in its reach and access and ease for folks to engage in this kind of abuse. What support or advice would you offer to someone who's worried about this occurring to them, or someone who might already be in that space?
I think knowing that it is valid the way that you're feeling. It's horrible online seeing reactions to people who especially experience the more AI related stuff, because they'll be like, well, it's not you. You don't need to be upset about it. It's not you. But the underlying intention of that is to humiliate you, is to control you in some way, is to embarrass you in front of your friends and family. People can lose their jobs for something that isn't real. So, you know, being afraid of that or feeling upset is very normal. It doesn't matter if the image is real or not. That victimization is still real. I would also encourage people to document any threats to shed, document any sharing that has already happened. And I would encourage people to reach out for support. It's hard because it can feel very embarrassing. I feel like it's not something that you can get help on, or there's the worry that if you report it, you can expose yourself to having to show those images to someone. And that's definitely normal to be worried about that, but reaching out for support, whatever that looks like for you, whether to a loved one, a professional, definitely encourage that.
Well, thank you so much, Nicola, for offering some advice there and some information on this kind of increasingly worrying form of abuse. Now that we know a little more about this digital abuse, we're going to be discussing it further with a professional who works in digital forensics and internet crimes against children. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Healing Begins Here. I'm Olivia Oropeza, VSC's Prevention Education Manager. In our first segment, we heard from Nicola Pritchard about the lived impact of digital and AI-related abuse. Now we're joined by Corporal Alan Hadley, a specialized investigator with the ICAC Task Force who works at the intersection of law enforcement, digital crime, and victim protection. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So to start, can you tell me a little bit about what ICAC is, what crimes they follow up with, and how you came to be working in this position?
Yeah, absolutely. So ICAC, it stands for Internet Crimes Against Children. What we do is obviously going to be very digital focused. It's going to be stuff based off of ISPs, which are internet service providers. We're talking about Verizon, Instagram, Snapchat, all the apps that we use, and all the internet service providers that we use. And usually what we get is we'll get tips about possible child abuse that's being sent over the internet, and we'll investigate those based off the information that we get.
Got you. Okay, and so this is a relatively new task force here in Central Florida, right? In
Central Florida, it being a specific task force for ICAC for Orange County is new. It's been around for a while. There's ICAC units all over Central Florida, all over the nation, and ICAC's been around for a couple decades now, federally.
Got you. And so you guys focus on those internet crimes against children, a lot of it involving digital forensics. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how digital forensics play into things like sextortion or image-based abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of our stuff's going to be, like I said, digital focused. So a lot of our suspects are using their phones, they're using their computers, they're saving the images on devices such as hard drives or USBs or anything like that. It could be anything that stores data. So we have to be aware of that. We have to be able to figure out ways to download that, preserve it in a way that's useful for court and for probable cause, and to be able to show how we got that information, how it links to the suspects. So we have a very good relationship with digital forensics. Because we need that knowledge base. We need to know how all these new devices, all this new technology, Apple, Samsung's, everything being used, and how we're going to get that information that we need for those cases.
So you coordinate closely with those other groups, app owners, cell phone providers, and things like that to get that information.
Absolutely.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How has AI and other technology advances changed the way that field looks or those digital forensics looks?
So AI has become a big thing, especially since we've talked about it before with how AI is being used in an inappropriate form for child pornography to be able to create images of people that may or may not be real, but to make them in a sexually provocative situation and try to find loopholes around certain laws that haven't caught up with AI and the technology of today. So it has been a challenge, and there are a lot of ways that we've worked around trying to solve these cases, to prosecute them, to work with lawmakers and other agencies and stuff as well that have really been catching on and trying to close the gap with this AI technology that's out there.
So you mentioned working within, the written law of trying to prosecute this and bringing forth that evidence. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe challenges there or new laws that we hope come into play?
Yeah, so there are laws constantly being passed. There's stuff right now in state legislature. Hopefully within the next year we'll get passed that allow us a little bit more leeway with AI and suspects using AI to try to find loopholes with CSAM, which is child's sexual abuse material and stuff like that. The federal laws, they're a little bit more free with what they can do against suspects using AI. State hasn't quite caught up to that level, but of course, if somebody's using AI on somebody who is a real person, we can prosecute those cases and actually get the suspects for doing stuff like that.
So you're seeing crimes even, non-prosecutable because there's no real person involved, but they're still creating that material.
Exactly. That's a loophole that some people have been using, and the states haven't quite caught up on the laws for being able to let us prosecute those kind of cases. Now, that doesn't mean the federal law enforcement agencies can't prosecute those if they so choose, but as a state level, it's been we're waiting on the laws to catch up.
I see. So it's kind of a waiting game, following what technology advances and waiting for laws to follow suit.
Absolutely.
How does the expansion and accessibility to this type of technology and AI, I mean, it's worldwide, how does that complicate tracking down perpetrators or, if it's an international problem, what does that look like?
The biggest challenge with that is every now and then in the ICAC field, we'll get some new app or some new AI technology that comes through. They're meeting the ICAC requirements of reporting these inappropriate images being sent online to us. And now we have to figure out a way to properly send legal documentation to them, to hopefully get the right responses and the right data back from them. And it could be all over the world. Other countries may not be so receptive to subpoenas and search warrants that we send out to them, and that could be difficult. We have a really good working relationship. Everybody in the ICAC community, from USA to Interpol to any other countries, we work good. We want to catch these people. So for the most part, we get a lot of support in those areas, even if we're sending it to stuff that's out of the country, to applications that are housed in countries that may not be quite so supportive of the United States on itself, but are still trying to work together to catch these criminals.
Yeah. So as much as technology is advancing and it can feel really scary to have that worldwide problem, it sounds like you guys are doing what you can to still follow up, find perpetrators, hold people accountable.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what advice could you offer for parents and adults who may have children at home or teens at home and they're accessing internet for the first time, or maybe engaging with strangers online? How do we stay safe online in this new world of technology?
Biggest recommendation I have is, at least for parents, to be involved in their kids' internet activity. Monitor it. Don't feel like you're invading their privacy. These kids are going to know more about the technology than any parent ever will. So stay on top of it, communicate, make sure that if your kid does start acting weird, that you understand why. There might be something that they're nervous about, they don't want to talk to you about. So have that communication, that dialogue beforehand, so that they know what they're getting themselves into. It's easy for kids to communicate to somebody who they've never met, who they've never done anything with online, and all of a sudden they built that relationship up, and then that person exploits that relationship. So if something like that does happen, there are resources available. NCMEC, which stands for the National Center for Missing and Endangered Children.
Yeah.
If you go to ncmic.org, they have a bunch of good, useful resources. You have cybertipline.org. You can report things anonymously if you need to. And also there's takeitdown.ncmic.org, which allows parents or the victims to be able to place the images or notate what was placed online and get those images removed. It is the internet, so it's kind of hard to remove everything, but Take It Down does do a very good job.
Okay, so those were 3 resources you mentioned for folks that if they find themselves in this situation, what is your advice for them to go do? It's go access those websites, but what other advice do we have for folks who find themselves in this situation?
So if you find yourself in this situation, if you think you or a loved one is in danger, please call 911. We can investigate those crimes right away, hopefully save a child if we need to. If it isn't a immediate life or death situation, ncmic.org, like I mentioned earlier, is a great resource. Tons of information for parents and victims to get any type of help that they need.
Okay.
And you can report as well. ncmic.org also has information on how to go onto social media websites from Kik, Instagram, or Facebook to be able to remove images online or report these crimes. And just know for the parents, if those images do get transmitted onto a social media site, report that, and that will get to a law enforcement agency eventually.
Amazing. So call 911, report, utilize those resources.
Absolutely, yeah.
Alan, thank you so much for being here today and
you.
for sharing this information.
Thank you.
We've just learned about some of the realities and nuances of trying to protect folks from technology-facilitated abuse and prosecuting abusers. On our last segment of this episode, we'll hear again from VSC's victim advocate, Nicola Pritchard, on how victims and survivors can get help. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healing Begins Here. In this final segment, we return to victim advocate Nicola Pritchard to explore concrete safety strategies, red flags to watch for in technology-related abuse, and how survivors can access support in healing. Nicola, thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, of course.
So can you talk to us first a little bit about some red flags that people could be on the lookout for when they're in relationships or meeting people online that could signal an issue?
Sure. So it's very similar to many other kinds of victimization red flags. Really, a lot of the online victimization has to do with almost grooming patterns and building up that kind of coercive relationship. It's very rare that it kind of just jumps to that immediately. But you want to look out for someone pushing you further than your boundaries are, or feeling uncomfortable about things that they're asking you. If you feel uncomfortable about sending a picture or sending a recording of something, sending a video of yourself, definitely trust that instinct, and don't feel like you have to do something that is being pushed on you. Looking for threats of, if you don't do this, then I'll leave, which is very similar for domestic violence. Even not online, we hear stuff like that. But I think it's also important to kind of note that a lot of looking out for those red flags is reactive, so there's not a lot of necessarily prevention that you can do of that, but looking out for those red flags. And then it really comes down to risk reduction, which is not my favorite thing, but is kind of the basis of what you can do with online spaces.
I see. So some of that risk reduction, what could that possibly look like? Are we, turning off our location settings? Are we limiting our access, people's access to us online? Being careful who we accept friend requests of? What does that sort of look like for folks?
Sure. So you kind of hit a lot of them already, but accepting requests from people that you don't know, who suddenly want to get very comfortable with you very quickly. We look out for that. Location is very interesting. Some people find it very helpful for safety planning because someone knows where they are, and that can be helpful, but being picky about who you share that location with. With social media, there's a lot more risk reduction tips that you can find of, not sharing your location right when you're at the location because people can find you there. Trying to be a little bit more discreet about showing your surroundings, things like that. And then making sure that, you are not sharing maybe your address with someone online that you don't know very well.
Right.
But again, there's a limitation to risk reduction.
Yeah.
You can know someone for a year and feel like you trust them and share your location, and then that is when the abuse can start. So I'm always hesitant to kind of provide it as something that will prevent it from happening.
Yeah.
We can try and reduce the risk that you have by doing these things, but there is still a chance that people can find you and gain your trust, and so that's where kind of looking for those red flags in the more reactive way comes in.
I see. So we're looking for red flags, and we want knowledge on how to react if we find ourselves in a possible situation with technology facilitated abuse. So what can folks do if they find themselves in that situation? Maybe they met someone and they have trusted them for a good amount of time, but now they're realizing the situation is a problem.
I always tell people document.
Yeah.
You want to have a good idea of kind of how things progressed. Sometimes that's important in explaining the bigger picture of how you got there, because I think people feel embarrassed about the fact that maybe they sent something or got to that point, but in their brains is kind of ignoring the maybe months and months and months of someone pushing you to do something or gaining your trust. But that's an important part of the picture, is you didn't just get there from, like I said, it's unusual that someone would just jump into send me a picture of yourself.
Yeah.
And so all of that is important. You want to document it. And I always just tell people, get support. It's hard to go through alone, and part of that control that they have over you is the isolation and the embarrassments that they kind of create for you, feeling like you can't reach out to people. And one of the first steps I always tell people is reaching out in some way to someone that you do trust, so that you can kind of start to break that.
Perfect. Okay, so we're reaching out to someone that we can rely on, someone who can support us. What advice could you offer for that supporter, for that friend or loved one of someone who's experiencing this abuse?
I think not minimizing what they're experiencing, especially if it's, AI generation related. I think that it's important to acknowledge what they're experiencing, if that's easier for you to kind of connect with. I think coming at it from a non-judgmental perspective that person already, I can assure you, feels a lot of self-blame, embarrassment, shame for the situation that they're in. Even if that all deserves to lie with the perpetrator, they're still experiencing that. And so they don't need you to tell them that it wasn't a good idea. They don't need you to tell them all of that. The point is you're there to support them and help them move forward. So coming at it non-judgmentally, maybe with curiosity and understanding their story and giving them space, but also allowing them to make their own decisions. Some people don't want to report it to law enforcement and maybe aren't ready at that time, and that's okay. And they may need to kind of work up to that point, or they may never work up to that point. But you might be the only person that they reach out to, and so really treating that with importance and respect.
Got you. Okay, so for folks who are experiencing, this kind of abuse, what role does emotional support or, therapy or counseling, how can that help support that survivor, even if they haven't maybe reported to law enforcement?
Sure. So it's really, we want to start treating the symptoms and the effects of the abuse. And sometimes that can lead to people ending up reporting, sometimes it doesn't. But we want to minimize some of the self-blame, the shame for it, and that responsibility that they kind of place with themselves. And so helping them put that in the right place with the person who put you in that situation, who did this to you, can be very helpful, especially even in looking at your options. Because if you feel like it's your fault, it's harder to go to someone and say, well, I want to press charges because it feels like your fault. So there's that aspect of it, and even if you don't end up reporting, it's still your quality of life and the way that you see yourself and the way that you trust others is all affected by this type of abuse. So you want to, start with kind of regaining some of that, and minimizing that control that you feel like they have.
Got you. So for folks who, maybe have experienced this in the past and are still struggling with it, or maybe folks who are just now beginning to struggle with this type of issue, we know that it can feel really helpless sometimes in those spaces. So what piece of hope or encouragement could you offer to those folks?
I think definitely it's an issue that is becoming more present on the minds of the government. There are multiple bills looking at being passed to try and protect people better on the internet and online spaces, which is an exciting development because it can provide some of those protections, and it adds some validity and can really reinforce that it is an important issue. Same thing with tech companies. If you look at the way that AI is developing, a lot of them have ethics departments now that look at how the technology can be used against people and trying to safeguard areas for that. So I think sometimes seeing those things can be helpful. It legitimizes that this is a real thing that's happening to many, many people, not just you, and that there are people out there trying to do something, which can be hard to feel at times. And then I think knowing that there are people out there who believe you and will support you. The VSC is always here to support people and provide a space for you to safely talk about what's happened to you and kind of start processing through it.
Wow. Well, Nicola, thank you so much for being here, for providing some tools and information on this, and for, again, the work you do at VSC to support these survivors.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us today on Healing Begins Here. Today we explored how technology, while offering connection and innovation, can also be used to harm, exploit, and control. From sextortion to AI-generated imagery, these forms of abuse are real and evolving. But so is our awareness, support, and education on these topics. If you or someone you know is experiencing technology-facilitated abuse, you are not alone. Please reach out to the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. Our services are free, confidential, and available to anyone impacted by violence, abuse, and trauma. You can call our 24/7 helpline at 407-500-HEAL or 407-500-4325. You can also visit healhere.org to learn more about our resources, safety planning, and support. Thank you for watching, and remember, you are not alone.